Welcome to the High Performance Disciple podcast. My name is Gareth Morgan, and my goal is to help you close the gap between your God-given potential and your daily performance. What I do is I explore the explosive combination of timeless spiritual principles and high performance practices that will enable you to take control, to be courageous, and to release the greatness that is in you. This conversation is designed to help high achieving, high impact leaders, entrepreneurs, athletes, and pioneers turn fear into faith, confusion into clarity, frustration into focus, and stress into strategy. If you enjoy what you hear, I would love for you to like it, to subscribe, to comment, and share it with others that you believe in. Here's today's conversation. Welcome to another episode of the High Performance Disciple podcast. I want to talk about something that I've observed over many years now when it comes to leadership, high performance, and developing healthy teams. And that is the power of conversation. The conversations that you and I have play a huge part in whether we are bringing the best version of who we are to what truly matters most. And for me, that's high performance. High performance is when I combine a clarity of who I am and I choose each day to show up as that person. And that combines with what truly matters most to me, what I'm passionate about, what I love to do. When I combine those two together, then I believe you get high performance. And so what role does conversation have when it comes to bringing the best version of me and what matters most to me? There have been many times in my leadership journey when I've seen people who were on track, bringing the best version of themselves and performing at a high level and delivering great outcomes for them personally and for the team that I've led. And usually when a person veers off track and they start to lower the bar in terms of the expectations they place on themselves, which then has an impact upon performance and what they bring, which then has a negative impact on their passion, so they lose motivation. It can always be traced back to a conversation that they've had. A conversation that either they shouldn't have had or they had and continued to process that conversation internally. If you think about it this way, conversations are like seeds. When you're growing a garden, you've got a picture of a garden that you want to create and produce, then you know that doesn't just happen. It takes the planting of the seeds that you want. It takes the removing of the weeds that you don't want. It requires, of course, the sunshine. It requires the watering. It requires the tending and the nurturing of the garden. But let's just focus on the seeds. It's about having the right seeds, the right conversations, but also uprooting the wrong conversations. Have you ever been in a conversation and you either became aware during the conversation or after, I shouldn't have been in that conversation? Maybe you say that to yourself because you walked away and it left you feeling bad, or it left a bitter taste in your mouth. Or upon reflection, you realize that wasn't a productive conversation. If anything, it might have even been destructive on somebody else's reputation because maybe it had the hallmarks of gossip. We've all been in conversations that we look back and think, I shouldn't have been in that conversation. But being aware of the conversations that we're having is absolutely critical when it comes to high performance. Because the moment I have a conversation with somebody and that seed enters into my conscious thinking and it's not uprooted soon, it starts to multiply and infiltrate my subconscious. As a faith person, I would talk about that being the spirit of a person. In fact, you don't have to be a faith person to talk about the human spirit. It's where our beliefs are. But particularly within the realm of faith, and particularly the Christian faith, we talk about the spirit and the flesh. In other words, the spirit being the part of us that is the God part of us, and then the flesh being the part which is the destructive human nature. And anything that we engage in of the flesh, in other words, to put this in a context for somebody who isn't a Christian, anything that is a destructive element that rebels against the self-image that you have and you want to demonstrate each day, that becomes something that needs to be cut away. It needs to become something that you deal with. And when we don't deal with conversations that we shouldn't be having, or we certainly shouldn't be incubating, that starts to have a transformative effect in a destructive way. It starts to erode our self-image. It starts to erode then how we see others. It starts to erode how we see our future. And so the power of conversation is huge. And I've seen it where people were absolutely on course, bringing their best, delivering the best to what truly mattered most to them, but they had a conversation and then they didn't deal with the seed of that conversation. And it then started to change how they saw themselves, their future, and even how they saw me and my wife. Now, that doesn't make them bad people. That doesn't make us better people. It just means that teams can come apart, be fragmented. And from my opinion, for what it's worth, I believe people can then end up settling for less than the best because they've entertained the wrong conversation. And this is really important because this is why I talk about high performance disciple. Because if high performance is bringing the best version of who I am to what matters most, then what's the discipleship part? Well, the definition of disciple that I use, or discipleship, is an immersive conversation that results in transformation. Let me say that again. Discipleship is an immersive conversation that results in transformation. So it's about choosing who I am going to have the majority of my conversations with, knowing that those conversations, the quality of those conversations, are having a profound, significant, shaping, molding influence on who I'm becoming. That's why I talk about the fact that my goal is to develop healthy, high-performing leaders who others want to imitate. When I talk about imitation, I'm not talking about, worshipping somebody, as in, having a relationship with somebody that you see as a coach, a mentor, a leader, and you're just in awe of them, you worship them. I don't mean that. I mean, you recognize that there are principles, there's a pattern of principles that you identify as the very thing that you want to see in your life. It's a bit like me going to somebody's garden and saying, your garden here, how you've got, and now this is where my ignorance of gardens comes in, how you've landscaped it, how you've got the vegetable patch over here, and then you've got this lovely pond over here surrounded by these wild flowers and these brilliant arrangements and the colours. Teach me about how you did that. Take me through the process. In other words, I've seen a picture of the future I want. I don't necessarily want their garden, but I've seen elements, or I've seen the outline of a garden that I do want and I believe can be in my garden. To be discipled by somebody is to pattern yourself after somebody. It's a biblical concept. Jesus came as God in human flesh. Why? Because fundamentally, mankind didn't just need a few tips of how to do life better. They needed a pattern to follow. They were following a pattern that was destructive and was producing all the wrong outcomes. And our human nature requires us to have a pattern to follow. It all went wrong right back in the Garden of Eden. Again, you can either take this figuratively if you're not a believer, and you're just looking for a code of success, or for you, if you have a relationship with God, then you will know that this has a fundamental impact on your relationship with God. That covenant of significance. That right back in the Garden of Eden, it was the conversation that Adam had with Satan and Eve had with Satan that they, number one, shouldn't have had or shouldn't have tolerated, but also they entertained it. In other words, they entertained the thoughts and ideas that were being sown into their thinking. Essentially, that they could be their own God and they could move from the state of interdependence. In other words, the relationship, the covenant with God that ultimately, as the designer and creator of life, makes life work, or to become independent and to go their own way, which of course, when you think about it, would be a bit like me saying, well, let me take my Apple computer and I'm going to decide once I've got that computer never to go back to Apple, never to go back into to them if anything goes wrong. I'm just going to figure it out myself. You'd be like, you're crazy. You're not going to know, Gareth, everything there is to know about that because you didn't create it. That level of independence is prideful, but it's also short-sighted and it's not a path of success. That's what happened. They entertained a conversation that made them think that they could be independent. And usually that's at the root of those conversations that you and I need to guard ourselves against, because it will wage war upon the concept of who we really are. Think about it. The conversation was saying, you could be like this. You could be like God. But the reality was they were already made in the image of God. Take yourself out of the faith conversation and you already carry intrinsic values that you don't need to pursue from somebody else to start putting yourself into a pursuit of somebody else's value or perceived value starts to make you believe that you aren't enough. Think about it. Now you're in a destructive pattern of thinking. And I'm going to make poor choices. I'm maybe going to make a permanent decision in a temporary situation because I start to believe a lie. I hope this is making sense. And there's a passage in the New Testament in the book of Acts. And again, let me share the spiritual truth here, and then you can apply that to a high performance practice. It's the story of Peter and John, and in Acts chapter 4, verse 13, and this played a big role for me on my journey. Me and my wife lead a church called Everyday Champions, and the name Everyday Champions, the idea that I can be an everyday, ordinary, 1 in 7 billion people alive today kind of person, and yet believe that I am a champion, that I can be outstanding, that I can be significant. It's almost a paradox. And that concept came out of these verses that I'm going to share with you right now. So I want to encourage you, if right now you're feeling more common than a champion, you're feeling more everyday than a champion, and you don't see yourself, or you're starting to see yourself as nothing special, I really want to challenge that self-image and self-concept that you've got. Because here we've got two guys who were fishermen by their job and their career, and according to the biblical narrative, not very successful ones. The only time they caught fish was when Jesus helped them miraculously catch fish. How many of you know that's not necessarily a good track record when your success is completely relied upon somebody else? And so what we have here is we not only have two fishermen that didn't catch an awful lot of fish on their own, but we also have Peter particularly, although all the disciples were guilty of this, who fled from Jesus in his greatest hour of need, and Peter, of course, who denied Jesus 3 times. The Peter who said, I'll never leave you, one of Jesus' closest team members. But of course, what happened? He committed himself, lifelong supporter, loyalty of Jesus, and yet he entertained a conversation that he shouldn't have had. He allowed a conversation to shape how he saw himself, and that conversation gave root to fear, self-preservation. I've just got to survive. If I admit to being a friend of Jesus, then I'm going to get the same fate as Jesus, arrested and killed. And so you've got Peter who denied Jesus. You've got Peter who's not necessarily the greatest of fishermen, and John. And so listen to these words. They were in a period and season of their life where Jesus had died and had resurrected and ascended into heaven. Now they were starting to go about doing the things that they had seen Jesus do. In other words, they were outworking the pattern that had been modeled for them. Remember I said, that's discipleship. It's imitating through that immersive conversation that produces transformation, that shapes my behavior and my results. And it says this, when they saw the courage of Peter and John, that's the people that were around Peter and John in that day, and they realized that they were unschooled, so they didn't have any letters after their name. They were ordinary men. They were astonished and took note that these men had been with Jesus. So people are astonished at Peter and John. How many of you would like to have that said about you? Wow, that person is astonishing. That person has just done the most incredible things. Let's face it, you wouldn't be listening to this podcast right now if you didn't have that innate desire inside of you. You want to have an impact. You want to have an influence. You want people to go, wow. I believe that's a God thing. Now, the motivation for that, that's where we have to really make sure that, again, as I said, it's about being outworked from our identity, which reflects well on God, our Creator, or if you're not a faith person, that ultimately you're not making it all about you, because that leads us down a destructive route. But ultimately what happened here was people recognized that the outcome of doing astonishing things was down to the fact that they had engaged in discipleship. They'd engaged in the right conversations, and that doesn't mean it all ends up being a perfect journey, as we saw with Peter. There was the low moments when he had, by his own denial, cut himself off from Jesus, but then he was reconciled. The discipleship journey is not easy. It is simple, but it is not easy. Most people struggle to stay on track with a discipleship journey. Now, you may be saying, but Gareth, I'm not a faith person. How does this apply to me? Again, discipleship is not just a faith concept. It's whenever you want to take the pattern that you've seen work in somebody else and adopt that pattern in your own life. You could do that just from in certain areas of your life. It doesn't necessarily have to be a whole life thing. It could be, do you know what, that person is a great father, or that person is a great business leader. I want to find out the pattern, and I want to have the right conversations with them, immerse myself in those conversations that ultimately brings that transformation so that I outwork that pattern. I'm not trying to be them, but I want those principles to be outworked in my life. They noticed that John and Peter had been with Jesus. Peter and John had immersed themselves in that conversation that led to transformation. So you can see here that the connection between discipleship and high performance, astonishing outcomes, outstanding moments, it is connected to discipleship. Now, I want to ask you the question. Who are you having the majority of your conversations with? When you look at that person, is that where you want to be headed? Or are there other conversations you need to be having? Are there conversations that you need to be stopping? Because actually the result of those conversations results in you starting to pursue success rather than live from success, to pursue significance rather than live from significance. Because here's the key. John Maxwell said it. A person will never outperform their self-image. A person will never outperform their self-image. Your level of performance, your level of results will be intrinsically connected and tied to how you see yourself. And how you see yourself is connected to the conversations that you're having. So choosing somebody who can mentor you, coach you, whatever title you give to that, or however you describe that. It's discipleship. It's patterning yourself after somebody. And of course, this then asks the question, well, where is it I want to be heading? Clarity of vision, where I want to end up. And let me encourage you, it's not just about a destination as in, I want to build this kind of a business, or I want to lift that trophy, or whatever that is. And there's nothing wrong with that. Of course, if you're an aspiring footballer, you're going to want to learn from somebody who has lifted the best trophies. Of course you would. Competency is important. But also, remember, ultimately, what makes somebody a champion, not only in their field, but in life, is the character behind the competency. So how does that person treat other people? Is that how I want to treat other people? Because you can't separate character from competency. If I'm going to learn somebody's ways, then I'm not only going to learn their competencies, but I'm also going to start to adopt the characteristics. And so I've got to ask myself the question, do I want to pattern myself after that person in terms of their competency and their capacity and capability, but also, do I want to treat people that way? Is that aligning to the values of who I am? So I really want to encourage you. I believe that there are astonishing contributions in you, whether you're a person of faith or not. If you're a person of faith, I believe God has put far more in you than you realize. And He has a bigger plan for your life than you could even imagine. So I want to challenge you right now that it's time to really ask what conversations need to stop, what conversations need to start, who do I need to be having them with? Because that immersive conversation that leads to transformation is absolutely critical to high performance. If you're not a person of faith, then I believe you're listening to this because you know you have an unlimited amount of potential. That unlimited potential needs to be leveraged through the conversations that you have, that open your eyes to the possibilities, that challenge the limitations that you have, that catch out those habits that you need somebody to challenge you. Because these conversations are not just like nicey conversations that make me feel good. Somebody once said that a coach gets you to do what you don't want to do in order to be who you've always wanted to be. So they're not always nice conversations, and a lot of people exit conversations when they stop making me feel nice. That isn't a discipleship conversation. Conversation is not to make me feel better, it's to make me better. So hey, listen, let's take control of our conversations. Let's be courageous, and let's release the greatness that's inside of you. I hope today's episode was helpful to you. You can get more by subscribing to my channel, and I have more content and tools that can help you on your journey if you'd like to head over to garethmorgan.tv. Remember, today and every day you are a champion, and there is more in you than you think.